Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the fragrant world of ancient Egypt, where scents were more than just pleasing aromas, they were a form of power, art, and even religion.
Imagine the heat of the sun baking the stone walls of a grand palace, the air filled with a mixture of jasmine, frankincense, and myrrh, drifting from the delicate perfume vials. The Egyptians weren't just adding a touch of luxury to their lives.
They were crafting perfumes that could transcend time itself. You probably won't survive this unless, of course, you master the art of creating timeless fragrances. But let's face it, we might not have the same ingredients on hand. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here.
Feel free to drop your location and local time in the comments. I'm curious where you're tuning in from, whether it's the heart of Cairo or a quiet corner of the world.
Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Ancient Egyptians were obsessed with perfume.
It wasn't just a way to smell nice.
It was central to their culture, religion, and daily life. For them, scent was an extension of power, an expression of divine presence, and an essential part of both their spiritual rituals and social structure.
But more than that, their pursuit of perfect fragrance set them on a path to some of the most incredible perfumery techniques we know today. They weren't just creating perfumes that smelled pleasant.
They were crafting perfumes that could last for centuries.
Let's dive into how they did it. Historians still debate the exact methods Egyptians used, but we know that their obsession with fragrance likely began with the religious significance of certain aromas.
Scented oils, resins, and incense were used in temples and rituals, believed to connect humans with the gods. But perfume was much more than a ceremonial tool. It was a part of Egyptian identity.
From daily baths to grand feasts, scent was an integral part of their lives, something that would blend seamlessly with their public persona and spiritual practices.
As we delve deeper into the secrets of Egyptian perfumery, let's take a closer look at the ingredients that made their scent so special.
The Egyptians were masters at using what the world had to offer.
They had access to an extraordinary range of fragrant plants and resins, many of which we still use in perfumes today. Imagine walking through the lush Nile Delta, that are thick with the smell of flowers like jasmine, lotus, and lily. It's no surprise that these plants found their way into Egyptian perfumes, adding a fragrant complexity to their creations. They didn't just grow these plants, they revered them.
The essential oils extracted from flowers like lotus and jasmine were blended with resins from trees like frankincense and myrrh, which were prized for their powerful, earthy aromas.
These ingredients weren't just bought off the market, they were considered precious and were often associated with the gods. The resin of the frankincense tree, for example, was said to be the tears of the gods. When the Egyptians used it in their perfumes, it wasn't just for the scent, it was for the divine connection. Historians still argue whether frankincense was the primary ingredient in most Egyptian perfumes, or whether it was the myrrh that took center stage. What's clear is that the Egyptians knew how to create a fragrance that would not just linger for a few hours, but could endure for ages, and they were willing to go to great lengths to preserve these scents.
In fact, it's believed that many of the best perfumes were kept in tightly sealed containers to prevent them from evaporating and losing their potency.
Think about it. When we spray a modern perfume on ourselves, we expect it to last a few hours, maybe a full day if it's strong enough.
But the ancient Egyptians, they wanted their perfumes to outlive them.
And so, they began experimenting with various ways of preserving these precious concoctions, using materials like ceramic jars and sealed alabaster vials to lock in the fragrance. These practices were so effective that we have found perfume containers dating back thousands of years, still holding faint traces of those divine smells.
Now that we've set the stage with ingredients and containers, let's dive into the methods the Egyptians used to create their long-lasting perfumes.
These weren't your average store-bought fragrances.
The Egyptians employed meticulous processes to extract essential oils from plants and resins. They didn't have the fancy distillation equipment we use today, so they had to get creative.
One of their techniques involved a process called cold pressing, where they would crush flowers and fruits by hand to extract their essential oils. This method is still used today in some of the best perfume making techniques, particularly for citrus scents. The flowers, like the delicate jasmine or the vibrant lotus, were crushed between stone tablets, releasing their oils slowly and methodically. It was an intricate, labor-intensive process, but the Egyptians didn't mind. In fact, they probably enjoyed the ritualistic aspect of it. The act of preparing these perfumes wasn't just about creating a fragrance, it was part of a sacred process, tying their creations to the divine. But the cold pressing method wasn't the only trick in their arsenal.
Egyptians also perfected a method known as infusion. This technique involves soaking plant materials in warm oils or fats, allowing them to absorb the fragrance over time.
The oils would then be strained out and used to create scented ointments and balms that could be applied to the skin or burned as incense. This method was crucial for preserving perfumes because it didn't just capture the fragrance, it allowed it to remain intact for far longer. Historians still debate whether the Egyptians were using essential oils in the same way we understand them today, or whether they were more focused on the actual fragrance itself.
Some believe the oils they used were more like solidified perfumes, rich with resins and plant materials, rather than the pure distilled essential oils we use in modern perfumery.
But what's clear is that the Egyptians were ahead of their time in recognizing the power of scent as a form of personal and spiritual expression. As we drift deeper into this world of ancient perfumery, let your mind wander to the scenes of Egyptian priests preparing fragrant oils in the temple, their hands working with devotion as they craft potions not only for beauty, but for ritual purposes.
These perfumes were believed to connect the wearer with the gods, creating an aura of divine protection or favor. Whether it was a royal ceremony, a religious offering, or simply the daily ritual of applying scented oils, scent had an almost supernatural power in ancient Egypt.
As we continue to explore the Egyptian approach to perfume, it's time to think about how these fragrances were used in daily life. And by daily life, I mean the royal life. Because, let's face it, perfumes in ancient Egypt weren't really for the average Joe. Well, maybe some were, but the most powerful, the most coveted perfumes were reserved for royalty, nobility, and the gods themselves. The famous Egyptian queen, Cleopatra, is often associated with perfumes, and her legendary beauty was said to be enhanced by these divine scents. Historians still argue whether she used perfumes for political or personal reasons. Some suggest that Cleopatra, who knew the importance of allure and charm, used her perfumes as a weapon in her diplomatic arsenal. She certainly made an impression on Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, and I wouldn't be surprised if a lingering scent of sandalwood or myrrh helped her along the way. It's said she once had an entire barge perfumed with roses before meeting Julius Caesar. Can you imagine being enveloped in a cloud of fragrance before even stepping foot on the shore? The scent wasn't just about personal allure, it had profound spiritual significance.
The Egyptians believed that fragrance could communicate with the gods. High priests would use these divine perfumes in temples to please the gods or to purify the air during rituals.
These scents were seen as a way to call upon divine favor or protection, creating a direct connection between the earthly realm and the divine. In a society as deeply spiritual as ancient Egypt, fragrance wasn't just an accessory, it was a vital part of the divine order. As you drift further into this world, imagine yourself walking through the grand halls of a temple, where priests in flowing linen robes stand near incense burners, thick clouds of frankincense and myrrh filling the air. The smell would have been overwhelming, yet strangely calming, almost as if the scent itself was a prayer. These perfumed rituals were integral to the worship of gods like Isis and Osiris, who were honored not just through words but through the very air they breathed. Of course, perfume was also linked to the afterlife. The ancient Egyptians believed that a person's scent could follow them into the next world. When a pharaoh was mummified, for example, special oils and resins were applied to the body to preserve it for the afterlife.
These were not just for preservation, they were meant to make the soul of the pharaoh smell pleasing to the gods when they arrived in the land of the dead.
After all, you wouldn't want to show up to the afterlife smelling like sweat and sand, would you? Historians still debate how much the Egyptians truly believed in these supernatural aspects of perfume use, or if it was simply an extension of the culture's deep symbolism of ritual and purity. What's clear, though, is that scent was inseparable from their view of both life and death. Fragrance was not just an adornment for the living, it was a key to eternity.
Moving from the lofty heights of royal use, let's descend a bit and explore how perfume permeated more common areas of ancient Egyptian life.
Now, if you're thinking that only the wealthy and powerful had access to these divine scents, think again.
The Egyptians, with their penchant for craftsmanship and innovation, were resourceful when it came to making perfume accessible to a broader range of society.
They didn't just preserve their perfume for the pharaohs and priests. It was woven into everyday life, albeit in more modest forms. Perfume in ancient Egypt wasn't just for special occasions. It was something people used regularly.
The Egyptians were fanatical about cleanliness and personal grooming, and scent played a significant role in both.
Imagine walking into the bustling streets of Thebes or Memphis, where artisans and traders applied aromatic oils as part of their daily routine.
These perfumes were often used in the form of unguent oils mixed with fragrant resins, herbs, and flowers. They were applied to the skin after bathing and could be massaged into hair and body, leaving a subtle, lingering scent.
The fragrance wasn't just a luxury, it was a necessity in a climate as hot and dry as ancient Egypt's. Bathing was an important part of the culture, not just for personal cleanliness, but for spiritual reasons too. After all, you couldn't stand before a god or your king without being properly purified. Oil, scented with lotus or frankincense, became an essential part of the ritual. As you relax into the world of ancient Egypt, imagine a marketplace where merchants sell fragrant oils, their glass jars gleaming in the desert sun, while the air is thick with the scent of myrrh and cedarwood.
But how did these perfumes work on a more personal level? Well, there were a lot of oils that served multiple purposes.
Frankincense, which you remember from the temples, wasn't just for spiritual purification. It also had medicinal uses.
The Egyptians had a long history of using essential oils for healing, whether it was to calm the mind, treat skin ailments, or soothe aches and pains.
So, while you might associate ancient Egypt with grand, ceremonial perfumes, in reality, perfume was also a daily balm for the body, a way of protecting and preserving not just the skin, but the soul. Now, let's talk about how perfume would have made an impact on the social scene. In a society where personal appearance was often a reflection of one's status and character, fragrance played a subtle but important role in signaling wealth, power, and even attractiveness. High society would have certainly worn the finest imported perfumes, while common people would make do with simpler oils. But the act of wearing fragrance would have transcended class. Imagine stepping into a private home in ancient Egypt.
You'd likely find small alabaster jars of oils on the wooden shelves, each with a different scent, one for the evening, another for the morning.
The sense of smell would have shaped everything around you.
As you apply the perfume, perhaps it's not just about smelling nice, it's about feeling connected to the larger spiritual world, reminding yourself that you are a part of something much greater than your daily existence.
Now, let's take a moment to explore the rituals surrounding perfume in ancient Egyptian religious practices. Ancient Egyptians were a deeply spiritual people, and their rituals often involved offerings to gods, purification ceremonies, and the honoring of the divine. Perfume played a significant role in these sacred activities, creating an atmosphere that was both physically and spiritually charged.
But how did this divine connection manifest in their rituals?
It's all about the power of scent to invoke the gods. The Egyptians weren't the first to recognize the divine power of scent. Incense and perfume were often used in temples, where fragrant smoke wafted through the air during prayers and ceremonies. Picture yourself entering one of the grand stone temples dedicated to gods like Isis, or Osiris. The air would be thick with the scent of burning frankincense, myrrh, and other exotic resins. This wasn't just about creating a pleasing atmosphere. It was believed that the gods could smell the offerings, and in return, their favor might be granted. Scent had an extraordinary connection to the divine in ancient Egypt.
In fact, many temples had rooms designated for incense burning, where priests would offer incense to the gods as part of a daily ritual.
The burning of incense wasn't just about creating fragrance. It was seen as a way of communicating with the gods.
As the smoke spiraled up to the heavens, it was thought that the gods would inhale the scent and be pleased by the offerings. This sense of ritualistic perfume was part of a larger system that connected the everyday world to the divine one. But incense wasn't the only way scent was used in religious life.
Perfumed oils were also applied to statues of the gods. You can imagine the elaborate scenes where priests would use these fragrant oils to anoint the statues of gods during festivals or other sacred moments.
By doing so, they believed they were inviting the gods into their temples in a sensory way, creating a presence that could be felt, smelled, and experienced.
The oils were symbolic, a way of offering reverence through both fragrance and devotion.
Historians still debate the exact role of perfume and incense in ancient Egyptian religious practices. Was it purely symbolic, a ritualistic means of connecting with the divine? Or was it also a practical method for purifying the space and the people involved in these sacred rites?
Some scholars argued that the scent was purely symbolic, tied to the divine nature of the gods, while others suggest that it served a dual purpose, both ritualistic and practical.
Perhaps the answer lies somewhere in the middle.
What we do know is that perfume and incense were integral to Egyptian spiritual life, not just as symbols of reverence, but as tools for fostering divine connection. Now, imagine the temple priests preparing for a major festival.
The room is filled with the sound of the priests' chants, the clink of golden ceremonial objects, and the rich, enveloping scent of incense.
The air is thick with the perfume of the gods as offerings are made, and as you watch, you can almost feel the power of the moment.
The incense smoke rises, and with it, the prayers of the people ascend to the gods. It's not just about worship, it's about creating an environment that elevates the spiritual to the physical, where scent acts as the bridge between the two realms.
Perfume also played a role in the afterlife.
When preparing the bodies of the dead for burial, the ancient Egyptians would anoint the deceased with aromatic oils.
The embalming process involved using fragrant substances, including resins and oils, to both preserve and scent the body. It was believed that these aromas helped guide the soul to the afterlife, ensuring that the person would be received by the gods in a state of purity. This belief underscores the Egyptians' understanding of scent not just as a physical pleasure, but as something that carried great spiritual significance, bridging the gap between life, death, and the divine. It's clear that perfume in ancient Egypt wasn't just about vanity or luxury. It was a sacred, symbolic tool in many aspects of life, whether for purifying the body, honoring the gods, or preparing for the afterlife. Scent had an intrinsic connection to spirituality.
Perfume was one of the many ways the Egyptians integrated the divine into their everyday lives, creating a world that was alive with meaning and scent, each layer connected to the gods. Now that we've looked at the role of perfume in Egyptian religious life, let's shift focus and explore how ancient Egyptians made their perfume last for centuries.
As you might imagine, crafting lasting perfumes was no small feat in an age without the modern technologies we take for granted. Yet, the Egyptians were masters of this art, and their techniques still influence the world of fragrance today. How did they manage to preserve their perfumes in a world without refrigeration, preservatives, or modern bottling methods?
The answer lies in the process of distillation and the use of natural materials that could withstand the ravages of time.
Ancient Egyptians didn't have the advanced distillation methods that we have today, but they were highly skilled in extracting oils and essences from plants, flowers, and resins.
They used methods such as maceration, where they would soak plant materials in oils to extract their fragrant oils.
These oils, once extracted, were used as the base for their perfumes. The Egyptians understood that the purity and quality of these oils were key to the longevity of the scent. Imagine a scene in one of the grand stone workshops in Thebes, where skilled artisans are at work. The air is filled with the earthy scent of crushed herbs, flowers, and resins. The workers, dressed in simple linen garments, are carefully preparing the raw ingredients. With great precision, they grind the flowers and herbs, extracting the oils with mortar and pestle. The process is slow and labor-intensive, but it's effective. These natural extracts will create fragrances that will last for millennia. Preserved in jars of clay or alabaster, one of the key ingredients in Egyptian perfumes was myrrh, a resin harvested from the conifer tree. Myrrh was prized not only for its fragrance, but also for its preservative properties. This resin was often mixed with oils and other aromatic substances, creating a base that could be stored for long periods without losing its potency. The Egyptians believed that myrrh, with its rich and earthy aroma, was particularly suited for use in both religious rituals and for preserving the body in the afterlife. The combination of myrrh, frankincense, and other oils created the luxurious perfumes that were used in religious ceremonies, while also allowing these fragrances to endure the passage of time. Historians still argue about the specific methods the Egyptians used to extract and preserve their perfumes. Some suggest that they may have used early forms of steam distillation, while others believe they relied on simpler techniques like soaking and pressing. What's certain is that the Egyptians had a deep understanding of the power of scent, and they applied this knowledge with remarkable skill.
Their ability to preserve fragrances for centuries is evident in the perfume jars found in tombs and archaeological sites across Egypt.
These jars, often intricately decorated with hieroglyphs and images of gods, were not just vessels for perfume. They were designed to protect and preserve the precious contents within. The sealed containers were made from materials like alabaster, glass, and pottery, chosen for their ability to block out light and air. These jars were meticulously sealed with wax, ensuring that the perfume inside would remain intact for as long as possible. The craftsmanship of these containers was just as important as the perfume itself, as the Egyptians understood that the preservation of both the fragrance and the vessel was crucial to maintaining their sacred connection to the divine.
As we think about the durability of these ancient perfumes, it's fascinating to consider the way they were used.
When you hold a small jar of Egyptian perfume, with its delicate glass and etched patterns, you are holding a piece of history. The fragrance inside, though faint by modern standards, is still a reminder of the past, a link to an ancient civilization that placed such importance on the sensory experiences of life. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Egyptian perfume is its ability to transcend time. What we may regard as a luxury product today was, in ancient Egypt, a deeply spiritual and cultural artifact, something designed to endure, to last beyond the lifetime of the ruler or priestess who wore it. It's not just about the fragrance itself, though. The Egyptians understood that the way perfume was stored, the materials it was made from, and the rituals surrounding it all contributed to its lasting power. Perfume in ancient Egypt wasn't just a commodity. It was an offering, a symbol of divine favor, and a way to connect with the gods. And perhaps in the preservation of these ancient fragrances, the Egyptians were also preserving a piece of their own spirit.
Historians still debate how the ancient Egyptians managed to create perfumes that lasted so long. Was it a combination of art and science? Or was it more a matter of luck and natural preservation?
Whatever the case, the fact that we can still catch a whiff of ancient Egypt today through the perfumes left behind speaks to the ingenuity and foresight of this extraordinary civilization.
Now that we've explored how the Egyptians craft their lasting perfumes, let's take a deeper dive into the significance of scent in Egyptian culture. Scent wasn't just a pleasant luxury, it was an integral part of their spiritual and cultural practices. The Egyptians didn't see scent as something separate from their daily lives.
Rather, they intertwined it with their religion, art, and even their understanding of the afterlife. The use of perfumes was as much about enhancing their connection with the divine as it was about personal pleasure.
Picture yourself walking through the grand halls of an ancient Egyptian temple.
The air is thick with the sweet, smoky fragrance of incense burning on golden altars. The scent of myrrh, frankincense, and other resins fills the space, adding a spiritual dimension to the stone architecture. Priests wearing linen tunics moved quietly about, tending to the sacred flames, their faces serene. The deep, rich smells of incense and perfume mix with the warmth of the temple, creating an atmosphere that feels almost otherworldly.
You might feel a sense of awe, knowing that these very scents were believed to carry prayers to the gods. For the ancient Egyptians, scent was a bridge to the divine.
The act of burning incense, an offering to the gods, was thought to send the prayers and praises of the people directly to the heavens.
Perfumes weren't just for personal use, they were an essential part of worship and ritual.
The gods themselves were said to have their own distinct scents, and the act of offering incense was a way of pleasing these gods, ensuring their favor in matters of life, death, and the afterlife.
The Egyptians believed that scent was one of the purest forms of communication with the divine, transcending mere words or gestures.
Historians still debate how much of the use of perfume and incense in ancient Egypt was ritualistic versus recreational.
Some argue that the widespread use of fragrant oils in the tombs and temples shows a deep connection to religion and ritual, while others suggest that it was also about personal enjoyment and status. Regardless, what's clear is that the Egyptians understood the power of scent.
They didn't just wear perfume to smell good, they wore it to make a statement, both to the gods and to each other.
Consider the many ways in which scent was used in Egyptian rituals.
Priests would anoint statues of the gods with fragrant oils, infusing the very images of the divine with the essence of perfume. When a ruler or noble wanted to show their devotion, they would present these divine offerings, often accompanied by elaborate incense rituals.
The act of offering these precious perfumes was an act of power and reverence, making the person offering the scent seem more aligned with the gods themselves. Let's not forget the funerary aspect of Egyptian perfume.
As we discussed earlier, perfumes were not just used in the temple or the home, they were essential in the burial process.
The Egyptians understood the importance of scent in the afterlife, where it was believed that perfumes would accompany the dead on their journey. When an individual passed away, especially a high-ranking official or pharaoh, their tomb would be filled with jars of perfume.
The scents were meant to ensure that the deceased would be surrounded by the comforting and divine fragrances of the gods, easing their passage into the afterlife, and keeping them in the favor of the divine.
These practices also tie into the broader idea of immortality in ancient Egypt.
The use of perfumes in tombs and temples wasn't just for comfort, it was a symbolic gesture meant to preserve the essence of life. By surrounding the dead with the finest scents, the Egyptians believed they were giving them a sort of eternal presence. The fragrance of the offerings would linger, just as the memory of the deceased was meant to persist in the afterlife. Even in death, the Egyptians believed that the soul could be sustained by the power of scent.
Today, we can see traces of this ancient belief in the way we use perfumes. Whether it's for personal enjoyment, special occasions, or even to create an atmosphere in a spiritual space, scent remains an integral part of our lives.
And while the ritualistic and religious use of scent has evolved, there is still something deeply human in our desire to connect with the world around us through fragrance.
The ancient Egyptians were among the first to recognize the power of scent to bridge the gap between the physical and the divine, a lesson that still resonates today.
Historians often debate the exact origins of perfume use in Egypt.
Was it truly the Egyptians who invented the art of perfume making? Or did they learn it from surrounding cultures? Some point to evidence suggesting that the ancient Egyptians may have been influenced by neighboring civilizations, while others argue that they were the true innovators.
Whatever the case may be, it's clear that Egypt played a pivotal role in shaping the world of fragrance and perfume, influencing not only the ancient world, but also leaving an imprint that can still be felt in modern perfumery.
Now, let's take a moment to appreciate how Elagabalus' life and reign, though marked by eccentricity and excess, also offer us a fascinating glimpse into the ancient world's relationship with power and personal expression.
Elagabalus wasn't just an emperor, he was a performer who used spectacle as a political tool. In a way, he anticipated the world of modern celebrity, where image and performance often take precedence over substance. just as the Egyptians used scent as a means to communicate with the divine. Elagabalus sought to communicate his divine right to rule through public displays of power and grandeur. Imagine this scene: the opulent halls of Rome, with courtiers and nobles dressed in their finest tunics, watching in awe as Elagabalus takes center stage.
His long, flowing robes shimmer in the torchlight, and his every movement is calculated to capture the attention of his audience. With each step, he spins a story of divine rule, of a leader who transcends the traditional military might expected of an emperor. Instead of wielding a sword, Elagabalus wields his charisma, his ability to captivate an audience through art and performance. His dances weren't just a form of self-expression, they were carefully choreographed acts of political messaging.
Historians still argue whether Elagabalus was merely indulging in self-indulgence, or whether he truly believed that performance could solidify his power and divine right.
One thing is certain: he was ahead of his time, recognizing the power of spectacle long before the rise of modern politics, where image is often just as important as policy.
While Elagabalus may have been a product of his time in many ways, his approach to leadership was decidedly unconventional. The traditional Roman emperor was expected to lead with military prowess, to command legions, and to protect the empire from its enemies. Elagabalus, however, was more interested in constructing an image of power that transcended the battlefield.
His reign, though short-lived, was an attempt to carve out a new space for rulers, where personal expression and spectacle were as significant as military victories.
Historians still debate whether Elagabalus' reign was a tragic failure or a revolutionary experiment in leadership.
Some argue that his inability to balance the demands of governance with his personal eccentricities led to his downfall. Others contend that Elagabalus' reign was a moment of boldness and creativity, a ruler who sought to redefine what it meant to be emperor, but whose time had not yet come. Regardless of your perspective, it's hard to deny that Elagabalus' life and reign speak to a tension that still exists today between the demands of traditional leadership and the desire for personal expression.
In some ways, Elagabalus' story mirrors the modern world, where leaders are often judged as much by their image and public persona as by their political decisions.
Today's leaders are often expected to be charismatic, relatable, and captivating, much like Elagabalus, who used his public performances to shape his identity. Whether it's through speeches, social media, or public appearances, the modern leader's image is often as important as their policies, if not more so. This tension between personal vision and political duty remains one of the key themes in Elagabalus' life. He wanted to be remembered for something more than military conquest or political maneuvering. He wanted to leave a legacy of art, spirituality, and spectacle.
But in focusing so much on his image, he failed to meet the practical needs of the empire. As Elagabalus' reign unfolded, his inability to balance personal ambition with the responsibilities of leadership ultimately led to his tragic end. Elagabalus' reign may have ended in scandal and assassination, but his story still resonates today.
His life serves as a cautionary tale about the limits of spectacle and the dangers of overindulgence.
At the same time, his bold attempt to redefine leadership offers a glimpse into a future where personal expression and performance play a central role in governance. Perhaps, if he had been born in a different time, Elagabalus might have been celebrated as a visionary ruler. But in ancient Rome, where military might and political stability were the cornerstones of leadership, his ideas were simply too radical.
His legacy is complicated, a mix of failure and fascination. But even in his downfall, Elagabalus offers us an important lesson about the nature of leadership.
It's not enough to create a captivating image or to put on a grand performance. You must also be grounded in the practical realities of governance.
Power may be shaped through spectacle, but it must also be supported by substance.
Elagabalus may have failed to strike this balance, but his story forces us to reconsider what it truly means to lead. In our own time, as leaders continue to navigate the complexities of personal image and political responsibility, Elagabalus' life remains a powerful reminder of the dangers of pushing too far beyond the boundaries of tradition. His story shows us that while vision and ambition are essential for leadership, they must always be tempered by a deep understanding of the systems that sustain power. For in the end, it's not just the performers who captivate history, but the leaders who balance vision with reality, ambition with duty. As we continue to reflect on Elagabalus' reign, it's impossible not to consider how his story challenges traditional ideas of leadership and governance. His failure wasn't just about his inability to meet military expectations.
It was about his struggle to reconcile personal expression with the demands of an empire. The ancient world, particularly the Roman Empire, was founded on principles of order, strength, and stability.
But Elagabalus sought to break free from these constraints, pushing the boundaries of what an emperor could represent. Imagine the scene once again. The grand halls of the Roman palace, filled with light and music, and the emperor dancing in the midst of it all. His movements are fluid and mesmerizing, a stark contrast to the traditional displays of power that were expected of him. With every twirl and gesture, he crafts a new identity for himself, a ruler who is not just a politician or soldier, but an artist, a performer, a divine figure. For a brief moment, he captures the attention and admiration of those around him. But as the performance continues, it becomes clear that this spectacle cannot sustain him as emperor. For all his creativity and ambition, Elagabalus' downfall lay in his inability to adapt to the complexities of leadership. Being an emperor wasn't just about making an impression, it was about maintaining control, building alliances, and ensuring the stability of the empire. Military might, political acumen, and the respect of the Senate were essential for a ruler's survival. Elagabalus, however, chose to prioritize personal expression and theatricality over these vital responsibilities. His desire to be seen as a divine ruler disconnected him from the very people he needed to govern effectively. As his reign progressed, Elagabalus became more and more isolated. The military, which had once been the backbone of Roman power, began to lose faith in him. His disregard for traditional Roman values, honor, discipline, and strength alienated the legions. The Senate, too, began to see him as a ruler who was out of touch with the empire's needs. They viewed his extravagant performances as symbols of instability, not divine power. The more he indulged in spectacle, the more he lost the respect of those who had the real power to shape the empire's future. Historians still debate whether Elagabalus was a visionary ahead of his time or a foolish ruler who failed to recognize the importance of traditional leadership.
Some argue that his reign was an early example of the power of image and performance in politics, while others contend that he was a tragic figure who couldn't adapt to the realities of Roman rule.
Regardless of your perspective, one thing is clear. Elagabalus was an emperor who sought to redefine what it meant to rule, and in doing so, he ultimately sealed his own fate. This tension between personal expression and political duty remains a central theme in Elagabalus' story. His failure was not just in his eccentricity or his desire to be seen as divine, it was in his inability to balance the competing demands of leadership. Leadership requires more than just vision. It requires the ability to navigate the complexities of governance, to balance personal ambition with the needs of the people and the stability of the state. Elagabalus' tragic end serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of losing touch with the very structures that give power meaning. In many ways, Elagabalus' life mirrors the struggles of modern leaders. Today's political figures often face similar tensions between their public personas and their responsibilities to govern. Much like Elagabalus, modern leaders must navigate the complex relationship between personal vision and the demands of the state.
In a world where image and performance often take precedence over substance, the story of Elagabalus offers a cautionary tale about the limits of spectacle and the importance of remaining grounded in reality.
Despite his tragic end, Elagabalus' legacy remains relevant today. His attempts to break free from the traditional modes of leadership offer valuable lessons for modern leaders. He showed that it is possible to reshape the role of the emperor or any leader, but only if that reshaping is done within the context of the responsibilities and realities that come with power. Personal expression and performance can enhance a leader's image, but they must not overshadow the practical duties of governance. Elagabalus may have failed as an emperor, but his story speaks to the complexities of leadership, identity, and power.
In his short reign, he challenged traditional Roman leadership and pushed the boundaries of what it meant to rule.
While his vision was ultimately incompatible with the expectations of his time, it offers a glimpse into a world where the image of the leader is just as important as the substance behind it.
His life reminds us that leadership is not just about power, it's about the ability to balance personal vision with the needs of the people and the state.
As you drift off to sleep, let Elagabalus' story linger in your thoughts.
His reign, though brief and filled with tragedy, offers a timeless lesson in the complexities of leadership.
It reminds us that even the most eccentric rulers leave behind a legacy, one that challenges us to think about the role of personal expression, power, and responsibility in the world of governance.
Perhaps in another time, Elagabalus would have been celebrated as a visionary.
But in his time, his story serves as a cautionary tale about the delicate balance that all leaders must strike. As we delve deeper into the life of Elagabalus, there's an undeniable complexity to his reign. His failure to balance personal expression with the duties of governance makes his story one of tragic irony.
He was a ruler who, in his attempt to break free from tradition, ended up distorting the very fabric of Roman leadership.
His focus on performance and spectacle, a strategy that we might now see as a form of branding, was meant to elevate him beyond the rigid confines of military conquests and political maneuvering. But in reality, it was this very desire to be remembered as a living, breathing symbol of power that caused his undoing. Picture the emperor now, draped in colorful robes, his movements an intricate dance of political and spiritual expression, his every gesture an attempt to transform himself into an immortal figure.
His court, filled with musicians and dancers, watches in awe, captivated by the mesmerizing display of art and power.
It's a spectacle meant to invoke divine favor, to connect the emperor to the gods and to the people.
Yet as Elagabalus performs, the cracks in his rule begin to widen.
While he captivates with his image, he neglects the responsibilities that keep an empire running. In the grand sweep of Roman history, his reign stands out as an anomaly. Roman emperors were traditionally defined by their military victories and political savvy qualities that Elagabalus was either unwilling or unable to cultivate.
While other emperors forged alliances with the military and the Senate, Elagabalus danced, performed religious rituals, and wove an image of himself as a divine ruler.
This might have been seen as revolutionary in a different era, but in his time, it alienated the very institutions that held the power to sustain his reign. Elagabalus' attempts to reshape the role of the emperor were, in many ways, ahead of their time.
Today, leaders often craft their image through media, public appearances, and public relations strategies.
In some ways, Elagabalus was an early precursor to this phenomenon.
He understood the power of spectacle and image, and he used it as a tool to carve out a new identity for himself as emperor.
However, like many modern political figures who use their image to gain influence, he failed to recognize that spectacle alone cannot sustain leadership.
Behind the image, there must be substance, something Elagabalus tragically lacked.
The emperor's fall from grace serves as a poignant reminder that leadership, no matter how creative or visionary, cannot exist in a vacuum.
It must be anchored in reality.
Elagabalus tried to redefine what it meant to lead an empire, but he did so without fully understanding the practical demands of governance. His performances, which once dazzled and captivated, ultimately became a symbol of his detachment from the very people who had elevated him to power. His failure to connect with the military and the Senate sealed his fate. Without their support, no amount of spectacle could maintain his rule. Elagabalus' reign might have been brief, but it continues to serve as a fascinating case study for modern leadership.
His life underscores the fragile balance between personal ambition and public duty, between artistic expression and political responsibility.
Today, we see similar tensions in the public lives of modern leaders, whose carefully crafted images often compete with the realities of governing. Whether through social media or public speeches, modern political figures often present themselves as symbols of power, much like Elagabalus did.
But just as Elagabalus' story reveals, image alone is not enough to secure lasting power.
One of the most striking aspects of Elagabalus' downfall is the way in which it highlights the limitations of personal expression in leadership. In his pursuit of an image that transcended traditional Roman leadership, Elagabalus failed to grasp that leadership also requires the ability to make tough decisions, to forge alliances, and to maintain the stability of the empire.
His story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of focusing too much on the self, on performance, and on creating a persona without attending to the structural needs of governance. As you think about Elagabalus' life, you might begin to wonder whether he truly believed that his image would be enough to secure his place in history.
Was he aware of the risks he was taking by alienating the very institutions that held the power to sustain his reign?
Or did he genuinely believe that his vision for leadership was the future, and that his unconventional approach would one day be admired?
Historians still debate these questions, but one thing is clear: Elagabalus, despite his failures, was a ruler who dared to dream beyond the confines of tradition.
As the night deepens, you can almost imagine Elagabalus, surrounded by his court, performing his final dance, unaware that the very spectacle that had once secured his position was now hastening his downfall.
His reign serves as a poignant reminder that even the most ambitious, creative rulers must understand the delicate balance between vision and responsibility. In the end, Elagabalus was a ruler ahead of his time, a visionary who, tragically, could not survive in a world that wasn't yet ready for his brand of leadership.
As we continue to ponder Elagabalus' strange and tragic reign, it becomes clear that his downfall was not simply a matter of eccentricity or personal miscalculation. While his obsession with performance and spectacle certainly played a significant role, the core of his failure lies in his inability to adapt to the needs of his time and the responsibilities of leadership.
Elagabalus' vision for the role of emperor, one that blended art, religion, and political power, was ahead of its time, yet it was ultimately incompatible with the practical realities of Roman rule. The Roman Empire, as we know, was built on a foundation of military strength, political alliances, and a complex web of social structures. The emperor, despite the divine symbolism and grandeur associated with his role, had to maintain control over these systems in order to secure his reign. Elagabalus, however, failed to recognize the gravity of these systems.
His refusal to engage with the military in the way previous emperors had done, coupled with his extravagant performances, left the empire vulnerable to internal and external threats.
Picture the scene: Elagabalus, standing before his court, draped in his finest robes, performing an elaborate dance to the sound of drums and flutes. The courtiers, once dazzled by his charisma and boldness, are now uneasy. Some exchange nervous glances as they wonder if the emperor's eccentricities have gone too far. The tension in the room is palpable as the emperor swirls, his movements graceful yet disjointed from the world around him. To him, the dance is not just an expression of personal creativity.
It is a political statement, an act of power. But to those in the room, it is a reminder of everything he has neglected: the military, the Senate, the very foundations of Roman rule.
The contrast between Elagabalus and his predecessors could not be more striking.
While other emperors focused on consolidating power through military victories, securing political alliances, and maintaining the loyalty of their legions, Elagabalus sought to rule through his image. His religious rituals, his embrace of the Eastern god Elgabal, and his theatrical performances were meant to elevate him as a living symbol of divine power. But these acts, no matter how captivating, could not replace the practical needs of governance.
Historians still debate whether Elagabalus' artistic approach to leadership was a sign of genius or folly.
Some argue that he was ahead of his time, attempting to break free from the constraints of military-centric leadership and forge a new, more personal vision of power.
Others contend that his inability to balance spectacle with responsibility was the root of his downfall. Either way, Elagabalus serves as a powerful reminder of the complexities of leadership. Leadership, at its core, is not just about creating a compelling image or captivating an audience. It requires the ability to make hard choices, to navigate the political landscape, and to maintain the stability of the empire. As his reign continued, Elagabalus began to realize, perhaps too late, that his extravagant displays of power had alienated the very people who could have helped him maintain control. The military, which had long been the backbone of the Roman Empire, saw him as a weak ruler, more concerned with his personal image than with the defense of the empire. The Senate, too, grew disillusioned with his reign, seeing him as a ruler who was more performer than statesman. Despite his best efforts to portray himself as a divine figure, Elagabalus found himself increasingly isolated, surrounded by those who no longer believed in his ability to lead. As the story of Elagabalus draws to a close, we are left with a ruler who, for all his boldness and creativity, failed to understand the balance required for effective leadership. He may have been a visionary, but his vision was not grounded in the realities of the world around him. His inability to connect with the traditional institutions of power, the military, the Senate, and the people led to his downfall. And yet, despite his tragic end, Elagabalus' legacy remains a fascinating one. A reminder that leadership is a delicate balance between personal ambition, public image, and the practical demands of governance. As you reflect on his life, you might begin to see the parallels between Elagabalus and modern leaders, who often craft their public personas with the same sense of flair and spectacle that Elagabalus used in his performances. Today, political figures are often judged not just for their actions, but for the image they project. In this sense, Elagabalus was a precursor to the celebrity-driven politics of today. But, as his story reminds us, image alone cannot sustain power. Leadership requires substance, foresight, and the ability to navigate the complexities of governance. In the end, Elagabalus' reign serves as both a warning and an inspiration. A warning about the dangers of overindulgence and self-obsession, and an inspiration about the possibilities of breaking free from tradition to redefine leadership in ways that resonate with the people. His life, though marked by tragedy, offers valuable lessons about the delicate balance between personal vision and public duty. As you drift off to sleep, think about Elagabalus, the emperor who danced his way into history, and the lessons his story continues to offer about leadership, ambition, and the complexities of power. As you continue to reflect on the curious reign of Elagabalus, it's important to consider how his story serves as a commentary on the nature of power itself. His approach to leadership was unconventional, even radical for his time. He sought to transcend the traditional role of the Roman emperor, viewing himself not just as a ruler, but as a living symbol of fusion of divinity, art, and political authority. In many ways, he was attempting to redefine what it meant to lead. But in doing so, he failed to acknowledge one crucial element, the necessity of balance. Elagabalus' attempt to transform the role of emperor was rooted in his belief that leadership could be as much about spectacle as it was about military might or political strategy. In his mind, the image of power, how it was projected and how it was received, was just as important, if not more so, than the traditional means of governing. He was a master of self-presentation, using religious rituals, dances, and lavish displays to craft a persona that was both captivating and, at times, terrifying. His reign was marked by a constant need for attention, for validation, through performance. He believed that if he could embody the divine, if he could create an emperor who was both a ruler and a living god, he would solidify his place in history. Yet, while his eccentricities captivated those who witnessed his performances, they also alienated the very people who held the power to sustain his rule: the Senate, the military, and the Roman elite. Leadership in the Roman Empire was never just about personal expression. It was about navigating the complex relationships between various power structures. Elagabalus, in his desire to break free from these structures, ignored them, and that neglect ultimately led to his downfall. Picture, if you will, the emperor in the midst of one of his grand ceremonies, draped in silk and gold, his movements fluid and almost otherworldly as he dances before his court. The courtiers watch, some in awe, others in growing discomfort, as they witness the emperor's performance, not just a ruler, but a performer who seeks to connect with the gods through every gesture. His court is a spectacle, a reflection of his vision, but beneath the surface, the military leaders and the senators whisper among themselves. They are no longer impressed, they are frightened. What they see in Elagabalus' performances is not the power of Rome, but the fragility of its emperor, a ruler disconnected from the realities of governing. Historians continue to debate whether Elagabalus' approach to leadership was a sign of boldness or hubris. Some argue that he was a visionary ahead of his time, attempting to blend art and politics in a way that modern leaders would come to understand centuries later. Others believe that his failure was inevitable, that no ruler could survive without aligning themselves with the military and maintaining the traditional structures of Roman power. But what is clear is that Elagabalus' reign serves as a cautionary tale about the limits of spectacle in leadership. It teaches us that while image and performance can captivate and inspire, they cannot replace the practical needs of governance. For all his creative endeavors, Elagabalus was ultimately a ruler who did not understand the full weight of his responsibilities. His reign was an experiment in self-expression, but it was an experiment that could not survive the realities of the Roman world. The empire was built on military might, on loyalty, and on political alliances. These were the elements that held Rome together, not the dance of an emperor or the rituals of a foreign deity. Elagabalus' failure to see this led to his demise, as his eccentricities became not symbols of strength, but signs of weakness. As you lay back and think about the rise and fall of Elagabalus, consider how his reign mirrors the modern world. Today, we often see leaders who use their image, their charisma, and their ability to perform in public to gain influence. In the age of social media and celebrity-driven politics, image has become a central component of leadership. Elagabalus was, in many ways, a precursor to this modern phenomenon, using spectacle as a tool to project his power. However, just as his reign collapsed under the weight of his excesses, so too can the focus on image and spectacle lead to the downfall of today's leaders if they neglect the practical aspects of governance. In the end, Elagabalus' story is a reminder that leadership is about more than just self-expression and performance. It is about understanding the delicate balance between personal ambition and the needs of those you govern. Elagabalus may have been a ruler who dreamed of changing the world through art and spectacle, but in the end, he was unable to reconcile his personal vision with the demands of the empire. His downfall was not just a result of his eccentricities, but a failure to understand that leadership requires more than a captivating performance. It requires substance, foresight, and an understanding of the systems that support it. His tragic end, though swift, serves as a powerful lesson for both past and present rulers. The story of Elagabalus challenges us to think about the true nature of power, the role of image in leadership, and the importance of balancing personal vision with the practical demands of governance. As you drift deeper into thought, remember the legacy of Elagabalus, a ruler who sought to reshape power, but was undone by the very forces he sought to transcend. His story reminds us that leadership is a delicate dance that must be grounded in the realities of the world around us. As you ponder the rise and fall of Elagabalus, it's hard not to reflect on how he reshaped the very idea of what it meant to be an emperor. The traditional Roman emperor, as we know, was a figure of military prowess, a leader who commanded legions, secured territories, and wielded power with a firm hand. But Elagabalus, with his eccentric dances and religious rituals, dared to push the boundaries of what an emperor could be. Instead of focusing on military victories or political alliances, he tried to build his legacy through art and spectacle. He became more than just a ruler. He became a living, breathing performance, a symbol of divine power. But this transformation was not as seamless as it might sound. While Elagabalus' boldness and vision were undoubtedly ambitious, they also revealed a deeper, more uncomfortable truth about the complexities of leadership. At first,
His performances captivated his court and his subjects. They marveled at his ability to transcend the mundane and communicate through his actions rather than words.
It was a form of power unlike anything Rome had ever seen, a ruler whose every gesture, every twirl, spoke volumes about his divinity and authority.
In many ways, Elagabalus was creating an emperor for a new era, an emperor who connected with the people not just through military strength, but through a shared experience of art and expression. Yet, as with all spectacles, the thrill eventually wore off.
Elagabalus, in his quest for personal expression, failed to recognize the limits of spectacle. The military, once the backbone of Roman power, began to question his authority. Emperors were expected to lead their legions into battle, to defend the empire's borders and ensure its security. Elagabalus, however, was more interested in performing rituals and dancing in front of his court than in managing the affairs of the empire. To the soldiers and the Senate, his behavior seemed less like a sign of strength and more like a symbol of weakness. And so, as his reign progressed, the tension between Elagabalus' vision of leadership and the practical demands of ruling a vast empire became impossible to ignore. He was not just an eccentric figure.
He was an emperor whose eccentricities were undermining the very stability of the empire he was meant to rule.
His performances, once a tool of empowerment, became a reminder of his detachment from the real work of governance. The Senate, which had initially indulged him, began to see him as a threat not just to their political power, but to the entire fabric of Roman society. To them, he was a ruler who had lost sight of the ancient Roman ideals of military might, discipline, and political alliances. Historians still debate whether Elagabalus was a visionary who saw the future of leadership or a fool who neglected the responsibilities of his position. On one hand, he understood the power of spectacle and performance in shaping a leader's public image, a concept that has only become more relevant in the modern world. On the other hand, his failure to balance his personal vision with the needs of the empire ultimately led to his downfall. Elagabalus tried to craft an identity for himself that was both divine and artistic, but in doing so, he neglected the hard truths of leadership, truths that demanded military strength, political alliances, and the stability of the empire.
As you reflect on his reign, think about how this tension between image and substance is still present in the world today.
In a time when political figures often craft their public personas through social media, public speeches, and staged events, Elagabalus' story feels eerily relevant.
Like many modern leaders, he used spectacle and personal performance as a tool to solidify his position, to create an image that would be remembered. But just as Elagabalus' reign crumbled under the weight of his excesses, we see how modern leaders, too, can fall when their image doesn't match the reality of governance.
Elagabalus' story reminds us that while image can certainly enhance a leader's power, it is never enough on its own.
True leadership requires more than just captivating performances or carefully crafted public personas. It requires the ability to act with responsibility, to understand the needs of those you govern, and to maintain the delicate balance between personal ambition and public duty.
Elagabalus may have been ahead of his time in understanding the power of performance, but in the end, he was undone by his failure to adapt to the practicalities of leadership. In a way, his downfall is a reflection of the dangers of placing too much emphasis on spectacle, of believing that performance alone can sustain power. As you drift deeper into your thoughts, consider how Elagabalus' reign serves as a cautionary tale, not just for rulers in ancient Rome, but for all leaders who risk losing touch with the realities of their responsibilities. His ambition was noble, his vision was bold, but his inability to balance it with the practicalities of ruling a vast empire led to his tragic end.
As you think back on Elagabalus' reign, a more poignant reflection begins to take shape. What could have been if his artistic ambitions had been allowed to flourish in a time more conducive to such boldness?
Was he truly a product of his era, an emperor trapped in the ancient constraints of Roman traditions? Or was he simply a visionary far ahead of his time? The grand spectacle he created, with all its vibrancy and eccentricity, may have been a precursor to a new kind of leadership, one where personal expression, image, and performance became just as important as political alliances and military strength. In that sense, his reign, though short-lived, remains a fascinating turning point in the history of power.
Yet, for all his ambitions, Elagabalus remained a ruler at odds with his environment.
The traditional markers of leadership, military conquests, alliances, and stability were the foundation upon which Rome was built.
An emperor who refused to engage in these duties was bound to face immense pressure, and that pressure, over time, proved insurmountable.
The Roman Senate, ever watchful and conservative, couldn't tolerate an emperor whose reign seemed more akin to an ongoing performance than a serious political campaign. To them, his dances and rituals weren't just frivolous, they were a sign of disrespect for the very pillars of Roman governance. But amidst the tension and conflict, something undeniably remarkable about Elagabalus remains.
He wasn't just a ruler.
He was an artist, a man who sought to carve out his identity as something more than a mere administrator.
His desire to transcend the boundaries of traditional leadership through performance was a bold move, one that might resonate more deeply today, in an age where the image of a leader is almost as important as their policies. Elagabalus, in his quest to merge the sacred with the political, might be viewed in retrospect as a tragic figure. Yes, but also as a precursor to a modern world where image and spectacle increasingly define leadership.
If Elagabalus had lived in today's world, would he have been seen as a genius, a leader who understood the power of visual impact, a ruler whose performances captured the imagination of his people? The question lingers, but it's important to remember that in his time, the gap between his ideas and the reality of Roman governance was simply too wide to bridge.
The failure of his vision wasn't just the result of his eccentricities, it was also the result of a world that wasn't ready for such a shift. His story offers us a mirror to our own time. We live in an era where public image is increasingly prioritized, where leaders are not just judged by their policies, but by their presence, their charisma, and their ability to connect with an audience.
Elagabalus, in his way, was experimenting with that same concept centuries ago, even if he didn't have the tools of modern media at his disposal.
His life reminds us that leadership is a complex blend of performance and responsibility, of image and substance.
It's not enough to simply captivate an audience. You must also understand the deeper structures that sustain your position.
As we continue to reflect on Elagabalus' reign, it's clear that his story isn't just one of failure, it's also one of boldness and creativity. A story of a ruler who dared to redefine power.
In that sense, his legacy is not solely defined by the scandal that marked his downfall, but by the revolutionary nature of his vision.
He wanted to change the world, to lead in a way that hadn't been done before.
And while his reign collapsed under the weight of his own excesses, his story continues to resonate, not because of what he failed to achieve, but because of the way in which he pushed the boundaries of leadership.
Historians still debate the meaning of his reign.
Was it a moment of genius ahead of its time, or was it a tragic lapse in judgment?
Perhaps, as with many figures in history, the answer lies somewhere in between. What we do know for sure is that Elagabalus' reign was a unique experiment in leadership, one that continues to provoke thought and reflection. His life reminds us that the quest for power is not always linear.
It's shaped by personal ambition, by the forces of history, and by the tensions between individuality and duty. As you drift into a deeper state of relaxation, let Elagabalus' story linger in your thoughts.
His reign, though fleeting and filled with excess, reminds us that the greatest leaders are not always those who conquer the most land or build the most lasting empires. They are the ones who, through their creativity and vision, challenge the very definition of what it means to lead.
In the grand theatre of history, perhaps it's not the military conquerors who leave the most lasting legacy, but the eccentric rulers who dare to dream beyond the boundaries of tradition.
Let's imagine the end of Elagabalus' life. The tragic conclusion of a reign that had once promised so much, and yet failed to deliver on its potential.
His death, swift and brutal, was the final act in a story filled with ambition, spectacle, and self-doubt. It's a chilling reminder of how fragile power can be, especially for those who dare to defy the expectations of their time.
When the gods who were sworn to protect him turned against him, it was the final symbol of his disconnection from the very system that had raised him to the throne.
The death of an emperor is a significant moment, not just for the ruler, but for the entire empire. Rome, though vast and resilient, was still a place where the balance of power could shift dramatically with the fall of one individual. Elagabalus, who had once been the subject of adoration and ridicule in equal measure, had now become a symbol of instability.
His attempt to reshape the emperor's role into something more creative and personal had ultimately alienated those who could have ensured his survival. His inability to navigate the delicate political and military landscape of Rome had doomed him, but it also served as a lesson for future leaders.
What stands out about Elagabalus' downfall is not just the brutal nature of his death, but the absence of a larger vision for the future.
His reign, filled with extravagant performances and bold decisions, lacked the stability required to ensure its longevity. While other emperors might have been defined by their military conquests or their political alliances, Elagabalus was consumed by his artistic and spiritual pursuits.
This failure to balance personal expression with the hard realities of leadership created a leadership vacuum, one that ultimately led to his downfall.
As you think about the fall of this eccentric emperor, consider how quickly the tides of power can change.
One moment, Elagabalus is dancing in front of his court, captivating the masses with his performances. The next, he's struck down, his reign reduced to a tragic memory. The shortness of his reign underscores a larger truth about leadership. It's not just about having a vision, it's about having the ability to adapt that vision to the realities of the world around you. Elagabalus failed to understand that.
His tragic end is a stark reminder that the line between greatness and ruin is often thinner than we'd like to believe. Yet, despite the tragedy of his end, there's an undeniable intrigue about Elagabalus' story. In a world where power was traditionally maintained through military victories and political alliances, Elagabalus stood out as an oddity, a ruler who believed that image, art, and performance could reshape the very idea of leadership.
His death, while tragic, is the final note in a song that remains intriguing, one that continues to provoke reflection and debate. Historians still struggle with how to classify Elagabalus' reign. Was he a tragic fool who failed to understand the deeper needs of governance? Or was he a visionary who simply lived in the wrong time? Some view him as a cautionary tale about the dangers of excess and the fragility of power. Others see him as a forward-thinking leader who was simply ahead of his time, a ruler whose vision of a more artistic and performative style of leadership might have worked in another era.
In many ways, Elagabalus remains an enigma. His death didn't erase his legacy, it simply shifted the way people viewed him.
The controversies surrounding his reign, combined with the strange and tragic nature of his death, ensured that his story would continue to be remembered.
While his reign may have ended in disaster, his life remains a fascinating exploration of the complexities of leadership, the dangers of excessive self-expression, and the limits of power in a traditional society like Rome. As you begin to drift off into sleep, let the story of Elagabalus settle in your mind. His life was brief, filled with extravagant performances and dramatic decisions, but it also serves as a reminder of the delicate balance that all leaders must strike. It's not enough to create a vision, you must also be able to adapt to the world around you, to balance your personal ambitions with the needs of those you govern.
Elagabalus failed in that regard, but in doing so, he offered us a timeless lesson on the fragility of power. As we reflect further on Elagabalus' life, it's essential to think about the contrast between him and the other emperors who came before and after him.
While many Roman emperors were known for their military prowess, political cunning, and ability to maintain the empire through force, Elagabalus sought to redefine power in an entirely different way.
His reign wasn't about conquests or military victories, but about creating an emperor who could command not just through strength, but through spectacle and performance. It's easy to see why his contemporaries were uncomfortable with this approach. Roman emperors were expected to embody certain ideals: strength, dignity, and a connection to the military.
They were supposed to be figures who could command respect through action, not just through image.
Elagabalus, however, tried to upend these expectations.
His attempts to integrate his personal identity with his role as emperor were both ambitious and, in the eyes of many, deeply misguided. He tried to transform the emperor's role from that of a military leader to that of a divine artist, believing that through dance, religious rituals, and cultural performance, he could become a ruler who transcended the traditional mold.
Historians continue to debate whether Elagabalus was truly a visionary or simply an eccentric figure who misunderstood the nature of leadership.
Some argue that his efforts to redefine imperial authority were a natural evolution of the role of the emperor.
After all, image and public perception have always been central to power, whether in the ancient world or the modern age. Elagabalus, in his way, was experimenting with these ideas long before the concept of celebrity politics took hold. Others, however, view his reign as a cautionary tale about the dangers of prioritizing spectacle over substance. The Roman Empire was not a place where personal expression could easily replace the military and political foundations that had kept the empire strong for centuries. Elagabalus' reign reminds us of the limits of personal vision, especially when it comes to maintaining an empire built on tradition and military power. His focus on self-expression and public performance ultimately alienated those who were essential to the functioning of the empire, most notably the military and the Senate. As you drift deeper into thought, consider the nature of leadership in general. What makes a great leader? Is it their ability to maintain control through strength, as many emperors did before Elagabalus?
Or is it their ability to inspire and captivate, to shape their image and influence their people through performance and art?
Elagabalus tried to create a new vision of leadership, but his failure to balance that with the more traditional demands of governance proved to be his undoing. In modern times, it's not hard to draw parallels between Elagabalus and the political figures we see today.
Leaders often craft their image, not just through policy, but through performance, whether it's in public speeches, social media presence, or the way they present themselves in the media.
Elagabalus, in his time, was experimenting with the same kind of image-driven leadership, only he lacked the tools and understanding to make it sustainable.
Today, we understand that a powerful image can elevate a leader, but it must be backed by the practical realities of governance.
Elagabalus never fully grasped that balance, and it led to his tragic end.
Still, his reign offers a fascinating look into the power of image and performance in leadership. Could a ruler like Elagabalus succeed in a world where image is as important as substance? Perhaps in a different time, his ideas would have been celebrated, but in ancient Rome, his approach was simply too ahead of its time. As the story of Elagabalus unfolds in your mind, think about the tension between personal ambition and the needs of the empire.
Leadership is, at its core, about balance. While Elagabalus may have been ahead of his time in his vision of leadership, his inability to strike that balance ultimately led to his fall.
His story is a reminder that no matter how grand a vision, it's essential to understand the realities of the world you are trying to change. Let's now look at the final moments of Elagabalus' reign, which are as dramatic as his entire rule.
By the time his fall came, he had already alienated the military, the Senate, and much of the Roman elite.
His life as emperor had become a spectacle in and of itself, and as history shows, spectacle often fails when it loses touch with the practical realities of power.
The people who had once found his performances entertaining and captivating were now questioning whether he was fit to rule at all. His reign, marked by indulgence and a disregard for the ancient values of Roman leadership, was beginning to unravel. The turning point came when the Praetorian Guard, the elite soldiers sworn to protect the emperor, turned against him. How did it come to this? Elagabalus had tried to break free from the tradition of military might, but in doing so, he had lost the support of those who made the empire strong. The Roman legions, who were the backbone of the empire, had come to view him as weak and ineffectual. His focus on ritual, religion, and personal expression had made him seem like a ruler out of touch with the practical needs of the empire. Even those who had once supported him now saw him as a liability, a symbol of everything that was wrong with Rome. When the time came for action, it was swift. In 222 AD, Elagabalus was assassinated by his own guards. The irony of it all was almost poetic. The very men entrusted with his safety, who had sworn to protect him, were the ones who ended his life. His mother, Julia Soemias, was also killed in the ensuing chaos.
This tragic end marked the conclusion of a reign that had always seemed destined to fail, a reign built more on artifice than on the strength of traditional Roman power.
Historians still argue about the exact reasons for his assassination, but it's clear that his eccentricities, his disregard for military and political responsibilities, and his failure to maintain alliances were central to his downfall. Elagabalus had created an emperor who was meant to transcend the old ways of leadership, but in doing so, he lost the very foundations that made the Roman Empire strong.
His reign had been an experiment in what leadership could look like when it was divorced from the traditional means of power,
And in the end, it failed because it couldn't withstand the weight of Roman tradition.
Yet, even in death, Elagabalus' legacy endures. His story is a reminder of the fragility of power and the delicate balance required for effective leadership. The emperor who tried to create a new kind of power, one based not on military might, but on performance and spectacle, has become an enduring symbol of the tension between personal vision and political responsibility. His reign, though brief, continues to fascinate historians and serves as a cautionary tale for anyone in power. The personal vision must be balanced with the demands of the state, or it will collapse under its own weight.
As you drift deeper into the tale of Elagabalus, think about how his story resonates today.
In an era where leaders often rely on image, charisma, and public performance to maintain power, Elagabalus' story is eerily relevant. He was an early experiment in the intersection of politics and performance. And though his experiment ultimately failed, his efforts to redefine leadership still spark debate today. His story reminds us that leadership, at its core, is about more than just public persona. It's about ensuring that image and substance work together to maintain stability and trust. In reflecting on Elagabalus' life, consider the fragility of power, the complexity of leadership, and the importance of balance in governance. Leadership isn't just about making grand statements or performing for the public. It's about ensuring that your actions align with the needs of the people and the responsibilities of your position.
Elagabalus may have been ahead of his time, but in the end, his inability to balance his personal ambitions with the demands of Roman society led to his tragic demise. As we reflect on the rise and fall of Elagabalus, it's important to acknowledge the paradox of his reign, a ruler who tried to break away from tradition but ultimately became a victim of it.
His desire to redefine leadership, to create an emperor who was both an artistic and political figure, was a noble vision.
But in practice, his reign demonstrated the dangers of over-reliance on spectacle and image. Elagabalus wanted to be remembered not for his military prowess or political alliances, but for something that would transcend the traditional understanding of power. In this, he was a visionary.
But, as we've seen, that very vision led to his downfall.
What makes Elagabalus' story so intriguing, and why it continues to capture the imagination of both historians and modern audiences, is the tension between personal expression and political responsibility. His reign serves as a cautionary tale of what can happen when a leader becomes too absorbed in their own vision and loses touch with the practical duties of leadership. He was a ruler who sought to transcend the Roman ideals of power, but in doing so, he forgot that the most essential role of any leader is to maintain the stability of the empire. His failure to balance these two aspects, personal ambition and the responsibilities of governance, was what ultimately caused his reign to crumble. At the heart of this struggle was Elagabalus' failure to recognize that leadership is not just about creating a public persona or crafting an image. While his performances and religious rituals were designed to connect with the people and elevate his status, they couldn't replace the hard work of governance. Rome was a city built on military conquest and political alliances, and to disregard these pillars of Roman leadership was a fatal misstep. In trying to turn the emperor into a living symbol of divinity and artistic expression, Elagabalus lost sight of the fact that rulers, even those with grand visions, must also be grounded in the reality of their role. However, even in his failure, Elagabalus provides valuable insights. His reign challenges us to think about the role of image and spectacle in leadership. In an era where political figures often craft their personas through social media and public appearances, Elagabalus' attempt to transform his identity into something more than a mere ruler offers a glimpse into the future of leadership. Though his experiment failed, his story remains a powerful example of the complex relationship between public image and private responsibility. For modern leaders, Elagabalus' reign is a reminder of the dangers of excessive self-indulgence and the importance of maintaining a balance between personal vision and the practical demands of leadership. It's tempting to use performance and spectacle to shape one's public image, but a ruler must always remember that power is not just about perception, it's about action. To truly lead, a ruler must understand the intricacies of their role and how their decisions affect not only their image, but the people they govern. As you continue to reflect on Elagabalus' reign, think about how his story might resonate in the context of contemporary leadership. In today's world, where image often seems as important as substance, Elagabalus' tale raises important questions about how leaders should navigate the complex interplay between public perception and their responsibilities of governance. Can a leader, like Elagabalus, transcend the traditional expectations of power, or does history always demand a return to the tried and true methods of political control? As we close this exploration of Elagabalus' reign, it's clear that his story, though tragic, holds profound lessons for both the past and the present. His brief time as emperor, marked by excess and flamboyance, is often seen as a curiosity in Roman history.
Yet, it carries deeper insights into the nature of power, leadership, and the limits of self-expression.
Elagabalus was more than just a ruler who failed to meet the expectations of his time. He was a ruler who sought to change the very essence of what it meant to lead. His attempts to reshape leadership through performance and image are as relevant today as they were in ancient Rome. Elagabalus' ambition to transform the role of emperor was revolutionary, though ultimately flawed. In his desire to be remembered not just for military conquest, but for personal expression, he sought to merge politics with art, religion, and spectacle. This is a vision that, in today's world, we see reflected in the rise of charismatic leaders who are as much defined by their image as by their policies. The modern era, with its emphasis on social media, public appearances, and personal branding, mirrors the world Elagabalus envisioned. However, as his reign reminds us, image alone cannot sustain power. The failure to balance one's public persona with the practical demands of governance led to his undoing. Yet, despite his shortcomings, Elagabalus' story offers us a chance to reflect on the importance of leadership that is both visionary and grounded in reality. His legacy is not just a cautionary tale about the dangers of excess, but also a reminder that leadership must adapt to the needs of the people and the responsibilities of governance. Power may come through image, but it is maintained through action, understanding, and compromise. As we think about the role of performance in leadership today, Elagabalus serves as both a warning and an inspiration. His failure to recognize the limits of spectacle and to embrace the more mundane aspects of leadership cost him his throne. But his willingness to break free from tradition and to think differently about power is something we can learn from. Perhaps in another time, his vision of leadership would have been celebrated, and the world would have been ready for a ruler who sought to redefine the emperor's role. In the end, Elagabalus remains a tragic yet fascinating figure in history. His story, though short-lived, challenges our understanding of power and leadership. He may not have succeeded in creating the kind of empire he dreamed of, But his reign, marked by eccentricity and ambition, has endured.
His legacy reminds us that the greatest leaders are not just those who conquer lands or build empires, but those who can balance personal vision with the needs of the people they govern.
As you drift off to sleep, let Elagabalus' story linger in your thoughts, a reminder that sometimes the most unconventional leaders can leave the most lasting impressions. Perhaps even in his failure, his attempts to reshape leadership provide us with valuable lessons that continue to resonate today. Leadership is, after all, not just about wielding power, but about understanding the delicate balance between personal ambition, public responsibility, and the complex systems that sustain it.